Seven elements of art.
With Mr. G.
All right, so today we are going to be looking at the 7 elements of art. These are the basic building blocks that every artist uses to create things like portraits or landscapes or maybe comic books, anything that you can think of in the art world. We start with these elements of art. Sometimes we use all of them, sometimes we use half of them. It just depends on. So today we're going to look at all 7 of them with some descriptions. The first one that we're looking at is line. It's the very basic of everything that we ever do. You've used lines to write your name. Do things ever since you were very little. So lines would be a good example, would be like a horizontal line. These are the things that we use. This is a vertical line. This is a diagonal line. We also have zigzag lines. We have curvy lines, spiral lines. We also have dotted lines, or things like this. There's all sorts of different kinds of lines that we can use. So we use the element of line to create everything else. So that's going to jump right into our second element, which is the element of shape. So we can use lines to create shapes like this. We could do it this way. We could make 4 lines to create this shape, or we could just use one solid line without stopping to create a shape. Of course, that's a square. We could use this one line to make a circle, maybe 3 lines. These are geometric shapes. You'll probably be familiar with all of these. Here's a rectangle. Here is a diamond. Other shapes. This one here can be called an oval, but also be called an ellipse. And then we have other shapes that are like this. And those are just called organic style shapes. So, maybe you could recognize that as kind of an organic shape of a tree. So these are geometric, and these are organic. So then we can jump right into the next. But right before I do that, I'm going to point out that all shapes are 2-dimensional. They have 2 dimensions. Now, that's kind of a big word, dimensions. So we have height, which I bet you're familiar with. Height is how tall something is, right? Like this one here. Versus width, how wide something is. So this is height, h, and this is width right there. So those are 2 dimensions, height versus width. Now, if we go into our third element, which is form, all of a sudden we drop into 3-dimensional objects. So, for example, we could take this diamond right here, like that, and we could turn this diamond into a 3-dimensional object just by using a couple of lines. Oop, that line should be a little bit straighter up and down, but so there's 3 lines from the diamond, and then we just connect these ones here. And I'm going to go up here like this a little bit, make it a little bit better. And all of a sudden we have 3 dimensions because we have height right here. Height versus width right here versus how far back it goes. That's depth right there. So that's 3 dimensions. This is D dimensions. So we can create all sorts of objects with shapes that we have and lines. That's one way of doing it without using what we have perspective lines. So let's just, for example, take an ellipse. Then we'll put a line down here. Let's just say we had another ellipse down here. All of a sudden we have a cylinder. So we could do that with all sorts of things. We could do that with, let's just say, a triangle. Add a couple lines to a triangle, and you would have a pyramid. So that's 3-dimensional. So then we can also take other shapes, like let's just say we had a shape like this. That's really actually a line. So we could even turn lines into 3-dimensional objects. So if we just gave it something here, like this, all of a sudden we have like maybe a canyon of some kind. Just by adding a couple lines together, like a curved line and some straight lines. And then I'm just going to give this a little bit of shading in here, because that'll give you a little bit of an idea of maybe a little bit of dimension as well. So, you have the height, you have the width of this, and then you have the dimension. All of a sudden has the example or the feeling of dimension. You could also do something like, let's take an ellipse, and let's take another ellipse. Let's put it down here. But they're not quite together, so we'd have to use a curved line to make another three-dimensional object. You could also do this with, let's just say, like a trapezoid. And then put down some legs there. Legs. Like that. Then you have kind of a rectangle cube. So this just gives you an idea of how to create three-dimensional objects by putting lines together and shapes together to create three-dimensional objects, or utilizing our third element, which is form. Number 4 is space. We're familiar with the idea of space. If a couple people are placed apart, like 10 feet apart from each other, we know there's space in between them. So if we wanted to look at that, the people as a solid object, that would be the positive. So let's just say this was a artist drawing, and you had, let's just say you had a person here with a really, really big head, apparently. Showing that to be a person of some kind. So that person would represent positive space within there. But then there's all this space in between. This area right here. And that is called the negative space. So the physical objects are called positive space. And then so this area would be all the negative space, and then this would be the positive. I'll give you another example that might show this a little bit better. Let's just say that this is our piece of paper, and we are drawing it. Let's say there was a cube on a table and we wanted to draw it. So what we would do is we'd look at the cube, we'd look at its angles if we're drawing what we wanted, if what we saw, because drawing is, a lot of it is drawing what you see. So the object kind of looks like that. Might not be able to see the bottom of this object, maybe not. Goes down like this. So that, of course, is the positive space in this. But what artists do is they look at every aspect of what they're trying to draw. So they look at the positive, the stuff that they can feel, but they also look at the space around the object, because that will tell them if their proportions are correct. That's kind of their measuring, the way that they measure things. And so this area here, this is positive, and then this space here is the negative. Now there's another way of showing space as well. There's another, I didn't even write this down. So number 4 is space. Not like outer space, although that's very spacious. So another way of showing space is the illusion of depth, three-dimensional. So a lot of artists will have some kind of a horizon line in the background, whether they can see it or not. And the way that they show depth or space with objects is, let's just say we have a giant box right here. If we wanted to show something further on the background, this is the foreground here. If we wanted to show something in the background, something going further into the background, usually what artists will do, if they're doing things out of their own head, is they will put down these lines right here. These are called the baselines. The further a baseline is, typically, the further an object away is. Plus, you can see by size. So you're utilizing these objects, these positive space objects and then pushing them back into the distance. You can see this with telephone poles. This is also, perspective is also part of space. So you can see these objects going back into space. They get smaller and smaller, and their baselines are also going up. So the lower a baseline is, the closer it is to you. The further up into the background, then the farther away it is. And that's just showing some depth. And if you wanted to show some real depth, you could put some mountains back here. Base of the mountain would go underneath the horizon line or the eye level line. And then you even have more space, you'd have more depth. So that's just another way of showing space. And number 5 is value. So value can be known as shading, how you shade something. And that's going to give your objects, whatever you have, a more of a three-dimensional look too. For example, well, this is what tint and this is what value is. So let's just say there's two types of value. There's tint, which makes things lighter, and then there's shade. We've done this before. Shade, which makes things darker. Oh, Mr. G, your handwriting's not that great. That's why I'm an artist. So you could start with a dark value and then go into a lighter value. And that's just part of shading. So a lot of the times we'll find out where the light is coming from on an object. And where the light source is, that's where the object usually is lighter. So this is just showing value. It's pretty easy, dark and light, as far as the concept of what value really is. Next we have texture. So these elements right here are probably your most important elements in drawing anything. And then once we start getting into texture and the last two elements, then you're really talking about perhaps realistic or giving you a real feel of what your art is all about. For example, let's just say this is my painting or drawing, and I wanted to draw some bark or something along those lines. I would get the feel of kind of something bumpy, just by putting all this little texture on there. And then let's say I wanted to make something smooth. How would I make something smooth? Let's say if I wanted to make maybe a billiard ball, something like that. I want it to be really smooth, but I still want to kind of get a reflection on there. I'd want it to be kind of like this. So at least you could tell it was a little bit smoother than this here. You could tell that it would feel nice and smooth. Get a little shadow in there. And so that's texture. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think. And then the last one, which we can't show with my pencil, with my ink pen here, is color. But we all are familiar with color. We have our primary, red, blue, and yellow. And with those, we can make any color, almost any color imaginable. And those are the 7 elements of art.
So for the project today, we are basically just going to be focusing on line. So all of the things that you do, you can do a bunch of these. These are just some good examples of it. I just want you to go through some squares and just do random patterns. Something that may seem like kind of fun, just experiment with lines, see what they do, see how they affect the space that you're looking at, see how they affect the depth. Because line can be one of the most powerful elements of art, depending on how you use it. And think about things like pressing down harder and then pressing lighter, and see how that affects your line. There's all sorts of things that you can do. You can create shading with just a line as well. So just be creative, experiment, be totally okay with failing on something, just like I did back there. because it's all about experimenting, because the more that you learn how lines work, the more that you will be able to see how powerful they are in your own art. And you will be able to move further and further and become more confident with every line that you do. And I think that'll be a lot of fun. Just challenge yourself to do that. Thanks for watching.